Hi, Clutter Fairy fans. This is the Clutter Fairy Weekly for December 13th, 2022. I'm your co-host, Ed Gumnick, and I'm speaking with Gayle Goddard, certified professional organizer and owner of the Clutter Fairy in Houston, Texas.
Hi, everybody. The Clutter Fairy Weekly is the webcast and podcast that digs deep into the clutter that piles up between you and the life you want to be living. We explore the habits and behaviors that lead to clutter, and we suggest strategies to slow the accumulation, reduce the collection, and comfortably manage the stuff we decide to keep.
If you're new to our Zoom meeting, we would like to let you know that you can share your questions and comments via the chat, and I'll try to make sure Gayle gets to them before we move on to another topic. You can also use the raise hand feature if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment yourself via audio or video. We highly encourage it. We're also streaming the webcast live on Facebook, so you can share your questions and comments there, and I'll relay them to Gayle. We're going to start by recapping last week's weekly Tittle, which was called Big Events, Big Changes. The assignment was to reflect on major events in your life that can change your clutter landscape. We'd love to hear from our participants in Zoom and on Facebook who thought about or started planning around one of those major life events this week. Please let us know in the comments.
There's nothing like living through one of those life events to realize how much it impacts the stuff around you. Having just done an estate sale for a client whose wife died, and she was a practicing psychologist, and so she had a professional office that we had to empty and do an estate sale for. And the kids sort of the adult children came up and wandered around in their mother's office and said, "Oh, I remember that piece of artwork," or "Oh, but basically they didn't want the office furniture, the bookcases, the office supplies. It wasn't really anything that they wanted to tap. And so it became a big disposal event for us to get all that stuff out. And the auction sold most of it, but there were still things that I had to get taken away, basically. And it's a big project. And so they have me to do it. So they sort of wandered around the office, looked at it and said, "Oh, I want that one piece of art." And they took it out, and then it was off their radar 100%. And I've spent 2 months trying to get that office empty. So it took she died in the early part of September, and it took until the end of November to get the office empty. So it's a big project when you suddenly have to empty a space that's full of people's stuff.
Here's the one I wanted to share. Jean said, "I have experienced most of these life-changing events since a senior. I need a definition on what makes a senior. Where do we cross over from being merely senior to being senior?" Jean says, "I have been able to cope since my affairs, home, and personal items are in good order. I've learned to optimistically plan for these events and tragedies. I have copied all manner of family and health and natural I've coped, with all manner of family, health, and natural disasters, and have been able to help others, even in my rather advanced years. When I recently dealt with kidney cancer, I also trained hubs how to use the dishwasher and washer."
Oh, look at that. Training your husband to work.
"I have recovered, but am mindful to prepare as much as possible."
Well, and that's just a planning mindset that really is working for you. Isn't that wonderful? Some of us are too distressed to think about a major event that might be negative. It's fun to think about a wedding, to plan a wedding. It's fun to plan, your 60th birthday party, but it's not fun to think about, okay, I'm going to die, and who's going to have to clean out the house after I'm gone. And so that process of facing the things that are scary or you don't really want to imagine, and then trying to do a little planning around them. It's great that she has had the ability to make those plans, to anticipate those events, to think about it, and to try to prepare herself so that she can cope better and the people around her can cope better. I know not all of you feel comfortable thinking about, what if I get kidney cancer? How am I going to cope? What if I die before my husband? How's he going to cope? These are things that are hard to think about, but planning can always bring a level of stress reduction and an anxiety reduction even if you're talking about something that is negative, if you can give yourself a little bit of time to think and plan about it, you're really giving your future self a gift that you've already thought about it when it isn't actually happening and you're not under extreme stress, and you can make some plans around it so that it's not so hard for you to cope with it when it actually takes place. And that can only be recommended.
Well, I think there's a funny shape to the stress reduction curve, because first, when you sit down to think about it, it may be a little overwhelming and it adds to your stress. You're thinking about these
In
bad
that
things
moment.
that could happen, or just not even necessarily bad things, but just things that are going to be represented a significant change in your life. And
And
so
overwhelming.
there's an increase to your stress, but then doing that, taking that time, doing that research, doing that planning can bring your sustained level of stress down.
Right.
Dawn shared, one thing I decided I want to do is to investigate the cost of an Acorn stair lift, because my DH is starting to have some issues.
Mm.
When we moved into the condo 3 years ago, one thing I liked is that the stairs are extra wide, and at 15 stairs, so it's high ceilings. So
Yeah.
that's
So you can
particularly
add that
important.
accommodation for him without
Yeah,
too much trouble. Yeah,
yeah.
that's awesome. Good thing to
Um,
plan for and do it now before it's really an emergency, because those kinds of things take some time and some, that's a little, it's more than a handyman can do. Installing those things involves installing track, and
right.
there's some serious construction to make sure that it doesn't fall down. It functions properly. It carries everybody safely. And so you have to really, somebody that knows what they're doing needs to come and do it.
Anya said, I thought about downsizing maybe 10 years into the future and to not think about which furniture to get rid of yet. Smiley face.
Okay. That's all right. You probably have enough stuff that you can worry about the little stuff and not worry about the big stuff.
Connie said, last week a friend was telling us about how crazy it was cleaning up after her mother died. Found all sorts of weird things, said to us, what was she thinking? We in chorus, she wasn't.
Exactly. She wasn't thinking about it. She decided that it wasn't worth thinking about. And so somewhere in her past, she was like, yeah, I'm not going to go there. Not going to worry about that. Not going to spend my time focusing on that. And here's the result. The result is that the kids are struggling to let it all go.
Naomi said, even the worst events are less horrible if you can do something about it.
Isn't that so true? I mean, people that are comforted by action and by being in motion really want to be able to do something. And if you don't plan it a little bit, sometimes what they do is more chaotic than helpful because they're trying to self-soothe with being in action, and they just sort of randomly pick an action and go, and it may or may not really be helpful to you. So having some idea about how you can ask people to help. If you are that action person and you really like to take action, then having a thought about what that action could be when you're not under severe stress or under a compressed time frame, or in arguments with siblings while you're doing it, or any of that stuff. If you can have some of those thoughts ahead of time, then you can go to that list, say, oh, I need to do X, Y, and Z. And you can start doing them already knowing that they're going to help the situation instead of sort of destroy or interrupt the situation and make it worse. And so it can then accomplish what you're trying to do, which is soothe you by letting you take an effective action while you're in the middle of this event. Good thing to plan for. You're really taking care of yourself by doing it.
Samudra shared, after a BFF's parents died intestate, my mother refused to go anywhere until she and my father had made a will.
Oh,
They also went ahead and bought burial plots and made the first arrangements. They also had me clear out the attic when they could no longer climb the drop-down ladder. They waited below to accept what I handed down and curated the results. Mama left all kinds of prep, unfortunately sometimes in duplicates that were updated differently, but plenty of instructions.
That's okay. She was thinking about it, and better an overabundance of instructions than no instructions.
Yeah, I mean, there's some work to interpret and negotiate if you have conflicting lists of instructions, but no
Right.
instructions. You just have to
You just have
start
to
from
roll with it.
scratch on your own.
Yeah, my mother had actually been she had been working on the elements of the her funeral that she wanted, the prayers and the music and that kind of stuff, but she hadn't actually had the meeting with the priest at the church she went to yet. And so we found this, a lined pad that had some handwritten notes on it where she talked about she like that hymn, she liked this prayer, blah, yada. So clearly she was prepping for a meeting with him, but it didn't take place. And so we used those notes, even though they weren't formalized, to help us pick. And I have to say, as I was sitting in the priest's office talking about planning the funeral, it was immensely helpful to have even anything that mother showed a preference about, so that I could pick things, because what did I know was her favorite hymn? I had no clue.
Yeah.
And so it was a big relief to me. And I think my sister as well. It's like, oh, these are the stuff that mother said she liked. Let's just use that. and that was the end of the discussion. And it was, it was super easy, because that was like, there's nothing like sitting with some kind of a priest, minister, talking about planning the elements of a funeral 24 hours or 48 hours or 72 hours after someone has died. It's the worst. I was really grateful even for those handwritten notes.
Yeah. Emily Sue reported progress other than Tittle progress. She said, I got rid of a heavy credenza, 2 bookcases, a stereo, and many other miscellaneous items in 2 big bins. Although I regret not being here last week because it sounds like a really great topic, I feel that I made some really significant progress on the donations and am moving closer to sometime moving out of the condo next year.
Yay, that is awesome. And what's great about having that, that sort of longer timeline, like you're talking about doing it next year, and you're working on big chunks right now. The idea of taking large pieces of furniture out that you don't want to maintain or keep up with, and making those go, means that you can do all that work and then recover and move on to the next thing. And you're not trying to compress all of that releasing and all of that packing and all of that unpacking in the same 6 weeks period, and being exhausted and overwhelmed. And so I applaud you for starting way in advance and working on it in pieces, and letting go of big things as well as little things, like making that, I'm not taking that credenza with me. I don't love it anymore. I never loved it. Sometimes I'm standing with people and they're like, yeah, I really hate this desk. I'm like, then why is it here? Why? If you have to look at it and say you hate it, then why is it still in the house? And so good on you for figuring those things out and letting them go now, and getting you slowly towards your goal without completely overwhelming you or overtaxing your physical condition. Good job. Everybody's cheering for you, right? We're all cheering for you. Yay.
Leela shared, my mother just turned 80. She informed me yesterday that January is when we are getting a lawyer and handling all paperwork about my parents' estate. She's
Oh,
frustrated with my hoarder father, who is not willing to clean out his giant workshops or sheds before Leela has to deal with all this stuff, with all this junk.
oh.
Ha. But it's great that at least her mother is thinking ahead to that.
Well, and working on the spaces that she can tackle, right? Like it sounds like his sheds and workspaces are designated as his and separate. And she's bemoaning the fact that the daughter is going to have to face it. But in the meantime, she's doing her part, and I assume working on the house and working on the paperwork, and she's trying to be helpful. And anything that she gets done, man, is one less thing that the daughter has to deal with. So good for her that she's being proactive. Sorry, her husband's not on board.
Yeah, she says mom has practically emptied the house. So it's
awesome.
The main problems are going to be those outbuildings and sheds, which at least
Yeah, our
You know,
outbuildings and sheds,
yeah,
right?
yeah, that's a little better. Pat
So
says,
I think you got to have an estate sale for that. Just go in there, pull out anything that you don't think that you think is important, and then let Max Soul come in and do an estate sale for it. Oh, and you
Pat,
get a discount coupon. Use the word buzz. You get $100 off.
Pat says, I am recovering well from 2 weeks of RSV with no energy and just taking one step at a time. Sorry about that, Pat.
Oh, that'll slow down your decluttering, right? You definitely don't want to push that. You definitely want to make sure that you've recovered your lungs and breathing capacity before you try to start messing around in dust or doing a lot of physical labor. And so take the time.
Pat says, it has surprised me that the previous organized systems that fell apart have bothered me so much. Things are getting back on track.
So it's a sign to me. I do find this is true, that when I work with somebody and we go through and we clear out a whole space, and then part of it starts to collapse a little bit, people get more distressed about it earlier than they would have. Like, because we've cleared it out, it sort of resets their response to it when it starts to come unglued, because they remember how much pain and suffering it was to clear it out. And so when it starts to devolve a little bit, my clients notice it really quickly. And so I get phone calls earlier rather than later. And that timeline's, the more we declutter, the earlier I get the phone calls when it starts to fall apart. And so when you put a bunch of effort into it and then it doesn't work, you're more sensitive to it because you just put a bunch of effort into it, right? And so two things. One, great that you're responding quickly to the fact that it's coming unglued. And two, you want to look at your systems and see if there's any kind of a execution problem with the system. Is there something about the system that seemed like a good idea at the time, but doesn't actually has some barriers to it for you? Is it too hard? Is it too awkward? Is it not realistic for what you're willing to do? You may need to tweak the system a little bit to make it flow better for you. And I do that all the time. We try stuff in people's houses, and then if it doesn't work for whatever reason, then I go back and say, okay, why did this fall apart? What's the problem here? Why are you resistant? What is in your way? What makes this difficult? And let's fix it. Let's make it be different. And so sometimes you develop the first system and that's really round one, and you have to experience it and use it and see where it fails, and then go back and tweak it to make it really the system that works for you. So
well, and a little flash forward to next week, we're going to be talking about putting projects on hold, as you will inevitably have to do over the next couple of weeks if things get crazy in your life, and how to pick them up again. And I think that there's quite a bit of overlap between that and getting back to your routines after an illness or vacation, any other big interruption,
some other major life event, right?
Well, we should probably get to our main topics for today, because we have 3 different small subjects we're going to cover. The first of them is focusing on favorites to sharpen your declutter decision making. My favorite things, and I'm hoping that everyone caught that the background image for Gayle today is raindrops on roses. Did you get that?
Is that your favorite thing?
Was that
These are
obvious?
a few of my favorite things.
Well, it's how the song starts.
Right. Because you're so clever.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So this topic was suggested to us by Christine, who wrote, "These are a few of my favorite things, just like in the Sound of Music musical, keeping the best of the best and getting rid of the rest. For example, picking only one holiday, a favorite holiday, and keeping supplies for only that one, or giving up crafts and hobbies except for the one favorite craft at a time. Having only one favorite usable collection, like clothing or kitchenware. It can be a lot of fun to think about what are a few of my favorite things. I think even children instinctively know this. They will have one very favorite stuffed animal, toy, doll, or book." Thanks for the suggestion, Christine. It was a great one. And we're going to explore how contemplating your favorite things might help you reframe your clutter questions and get a fresh perspective on tough decisions. She is very enthusiastic and talking about picking the best of the best. And so she, in her little quote there, she was really discussing having a favorite or a very small few favorites. And that may not work for everybody, but we're going to talk about favorites in general. So let's start with sharing some survey responses. What we asked the audience was, if you have to name only one possession as your favorite thing, what would you choose? And we got some interesting responses like giraffe figurines. That was a new one. I have never seen a collection of giraffe figurines. My dad sent in that he has a collection of Waterford crystal whiskey glasses. And yes, he does. And an angel teddy bear was on someone's list. A ceramic chocolate Easter bunny that looks just like the traditional candy bunny of my childhood was one that Margaret suggested was her favorite thing. A small brass unicorn statue that reminds me of a very vivid dream I once had. That was Amelia's favorite thing. Quite a few respondents mentioned their computers, phones, and tablet devices, and several people answered my car. And I have to say, I kind of agree with that about the car and the phone. Those are two of my favorite things. It's true. Lynn said my cell phone. It has allowed me to stay in contact with friends and family during the pandemic, keeps precious photos and correspondence, tracks appointments, does my banking, and entertains me with games and movies, all without adding clutter to my house. And isn't that true? Smart devices have certainly changed our focus. We interact with the world much differently because of them, not the least of which is walking around with a device full of photos that we look at immediately after we take the photos, and we share with our friends and family right then and later on too. There's no need to carry around a pack of photos to show people because you can whip out the phone instead. Back in the day, you took those photos on vacation and you had no idea how they came out until you got home and got them developed. Now we can take them and share them in real time. And if they're awful, we can try again. Complete game changer for photo storage. It really changed how we interact with, how we take photos, how we interact with them, how we share them, how we store them. Glenna shared so many things and they just get piled on top of each other and forgotten. Guess I don't know the answer to a favorite thing.
Several people indicated that they were struggling to answer that, and which tells me that it's a very good question. If you're having trouble answering it, then there's probably stuff in your house that doesn't fit the qualifications you would set for favorite things. There were several different threads in the things that people did mention as favorites, and they tended to be, it has a high sentimental value,
right?
Or it has a high degree of usefulness.
Yeah. Functionality.
Yeah. Or it's very beautiful. Or I think in some cases it may be, I use it all the time, so I can't imagine being without it.
Right. Which is
a little bit different from, well, and that's a little different from usefulness. It's like, I don't know that our cell phones would be our favorite things. If they took them away from us and we lived our lives a different way, then they might not be our favorite things. But because of the lifestyle that has developed, they're right there. Right. They have to be.
They have to be now. It's totally true. Yeah, I think basically what Glenn is describing to me is there's so many things and they get piled on top of each other and forgotten. And to me, that is, it isn't that all those things are favorite things. They're just things that you like. And so I have a client who I've had for a long time. And when we started working together, I would pick up things and say, do you like it? Are we keeping it? Yes or no? And the first thing that she would say to me was always, isn't it cute? It's like, well, yeah, but that isn't the question here. The question is, does it need to stay or does it need to go? Is it something that you really like or not? And so for her, everything had some level of cuteness to it. Everything had some level of attraction to her, which is why it was in the house. So all of the things in the house that have some level of, I respond positively to it, I have interest in it, I find it appealing in some way, creates a collection, but doesn't set a favorite bar. It's not your favorite things. It's just all things that you're having a positive response to. And those things get piled up on top of each other and forgotten, because it's not likely that everything in your house that's in a pile is your favorite things. They're all just things that in that moment when you saw them, you found them appealing or interesting, or the right color, or suited your mood, or whatever was happening in that moment where you felt some kind of attraction to it and grabbed it and brought it home, or found it and left it out because it was appealing to you in that moment. For people that respond that way to all kinds of things with it's beautiful, it's special, it's interesting, it's cute, you're going to have that response over a broad range of things. And it's going to not be a sufficient filter, because you probably are surrounded by things that you think are pretty interesting, useful, and it's not a high enough bar for you to make a choice about whether it can stay or go. If you find all things interesting and useful and cute and pretty, then clearly it's the category is too broad, and you're gonna have to narrow it a little bit more. If you just assume that if you're creative and artistic and you see beauty in all kinds of things that other people wouldn't necessarily, then you just have to move on to accept, I find a whole lot of beauty in the world and I can't live with it all. It's not necessary for me to live with all the things that I find appealing or beautiful. I can live with a much smaller curated collection of things that are beautiful, and I can let the rest be out in the universe for other people to play with. Your favorite things are an easy decision to keep. Like I know that this is my favorite giraffe or photo or fill in the blank. And so that decision is super quick and easy. I love this thing. I'm keeping it. It's hanging on the wall for a reason. It's over here being displayed for a reason. And so you are more happy to spend time maintaining it. You're willing to make a space for it so that it can be displayed, or you can look at it. Those favorite things are the ones that get systems quickly and easily, because you've already decided how important and valuable it is to you. And so you make those choices quickly. We're suggesting that you can use that response and that feeling about the favorite thing as a way to compare other things in your house. You can compare each item that you have to those favorites to help you gauge how important something is to you.
How much meaning it holds.
Yeah, how much meaning it holds in your life. And if you don't have the same attachment, then it can be in line for letting it go. And which is why I also brought up the idea of if you see beauty in a whole bunch of things, then that isn't a sufficient way to reduce the population in your house. And so instead, pick the favorite and compare everything to that favorite thing and say, I love this favorite thing so much. How do I feel about this in comparison to it? Do I love it as much? Is it really the same level of favorite? And if it's not, then you can have some other conversations about, does it really need to stay in the house? Am I really using it? And if you're one of those people that sees beauty in all things, then you get your default position is, I already know I think everything's beautiful. That doesn't help me. I have to move on from, is it one of my favorites? Am I using it now? Do I need to make space to display it? Is it worth me keeping up with it? You can donate some beautiful things and let them go to other people and let other people look at the beauty while you keep your actual favorites, or the ones you're actually going to use or maintain or display. Also, don't forget that you need to take into account your favorite things may change over time. We all grow and change, and we develop new interests. What was very important in high school may not be as important 20 years later. So it's good to make space for your changing and evolving tastes and interests. Revisit those favorites every once in a while and see if they still hold the same importance in your heart as they once did. If you move on to other fascinations, it's okay to let the prior versions leave the house. You may have bought that painting and hung it on the wall 20 years ago, and you loved it in the moment. And now maybe it's 20 years later and your tastes have evolved and it's not so much your favorite anymore. It's okay to go, yeah, I got 20 years out of this and now I'm over it and I'm on to other stuff and I can let it go. And that makes me think of the piece that your friend made, Ed, that we took out of your house.
Right. The cross stitch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He received it from someone. It was a gift. He honored it for a while and hung up on the wall.
About
But
20 years.
Right. But it wasn't his favorite thing anymore. And, when I suggested to him that he could let it go, I think, that was early on in our decluttering process. And I think he was quite shocked at the idea that he could let it go. He sort of looked at me like, really? I don't have to keep this. But it was an important moment to recognize he had really given it a lot of honor in his younger life. And he had evolved past this cross stitch piece of artwork and he could let it go. And you can too. You can make accommodation for, you're not the same person that you used to be. You don't have to be frozen in time. Your house doesn't have to be frozen in time. And as you move and change, so can your collections, the things that you keep, the things that you display. You can surrender things to move on to the next person when you're done with them.
Great comment from Samudra that I think really speaks to the issue that underlay Glenna's comment about so many things that just get piled on top of each other and forgotten. Samudra said, the more I declutter, the more beautiful what's left becomes.
What a great point of view. That's really, it is true because you see it and you can have it be displayed and you can recognize that it's out there and its value. Yeah, that's a really good point. When it's drowning in stuff, it's much harder to see all the pieces. But when you get it down to a manageable collection that you can actually see, then you truly can honor it, value it, experience it, enjoy it, like you are hoping to do when you bring it home the first time.
Things that are fighting for your attention in the cluttered landscape of your house, you're not really honoring the meaning they have for you if there's so much that there are too many things you can't see and too many things that are buried.
Yeah.
So Mudra also said, if I love it and it's beautiful and I use it, it's a favorite. If I love it and it's beautiful and I don't use it, that's probably a problem.
Because you can love it, but if you're not using it, then you're really just storing it for no reason other than you think it's pretty. and I'm going to suggest that all of us don't have a lot of spare room for that kind of stuff. Like you end up surrendering living space that you need for stuff that you aren't using, that just because it's pretty. And having
now, if you're using it decoratively,
yeah, that's a use, right?
I mean, decoration is a use.
It's a use.
And so if it's decorative and you feel like it will make other people happy to see it when they're in your home, that's a use.
You like the look of how it makes the house look. Yeah. But that's part of a decorating plan, right? Like you've made a plan about, I think this looks pretty here. I think this, adds to the view of the living room when this is sitting on that table, whatever. It's all part of creating a pretty space to look at when the living room is drowning. Yesterday I went to do an assessment appointment and it was a young couple that had a 3-year-old toddler who spent the entire assessment appointment pulling out toys in the living room and playing with them and trying to get me to play with them and trying to get the parents to play with them. And there's a point in your life where the living room is a disaster zone because you have little kids. But once you get past that point, then you turn around and try to reclaim your house and make it something that you like the look of that isn't buried in toys. And they were clearly not, they were in the middle of their journey, not at the end of their journey. It was that living room was surrendered to the kids for sure.
Okay, we had better move on to our next
Oh,
topic,
okay.
or we
Goodness,
are going to
yes.
run out of time. Today is going really fast. Of course, we'll go a few minutes over because we got a late start. So
Yes. Okay, so the next topic is decluttering shared workspaces for offices and teams. An anonymous person wrote into the survey and suggested this topic, and they said, I'd love to hear an episode on decluttering shared workspaces for offices and teams and any tips and tricks you have for building consensus there. So great topic. There's several things to unpack here, and the person who suggested it is presumably working in a space where there isn't consensus on how to keep the office organized, or at least not to everyone's satisfaction. In answering the question on our survey, the audience, we asked them to tell us about their professional work setting, and the answers that came up most, 39% said they're retired, 17% said they work from home in a space other than an office, 14% work in a home office, 10% are of working age but not employed, 10% share office space with coworkers. And smaller groups of our audience reported sharing a home office, using a co-working space, or working in clients' homes or offices, which are all settings in which you might have to negotiate the different opinions and people's feelings, organizing styles, to try to arrive at a state of organizing that makes as many people happy as possible. So let's talk about some of the factors that go into organizing a shared space. Ed, do you want to talk about these two?
well, yeah, I think there's an important distinction between home organizing and office organizing when we're talking about a professional office as opposed to a home office,
right.
Which is that in the office, there is always someone who has the ultimate authority over decision making, which makes it easier in a certain sense, because there's always someone you can go to say, what's the final decision?
Can we throw this away?
Yeah. Do we really have to keep this?
Yeah.
And how many of these do we have to keep around?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that I think really comes into play here is organizing styles, where you have to hyper organized people may have to settle for a system that only serves people who are sort of at the median level or organization. When you've got a large group of people in a common office space, for example, there will be people who will not be happy unless everything is put away. And
that's on one end of the spectrum, right?
And if you accommodate those people, then people at the other end, the visual people who need to see things to be reminded that they exist and are there to be used, will be thwarted by everything being containerized and hidden away and
put behind the doors
and closets and so forth. So you have to find some kind of, well, as the person who suggested this said, some kind of consensus.
Yeah. And it's going to be one where, like in any kind of team, nobody's going to be 100% happy.
Right.
But I think it's just like a shared home. Decluttering in a shared workspace needs tasks to be divided up and rotated amongst a team who share that space. So part of it is going to be the maintenance of an area that they have to share, and that shouldn't always fall on Glenda's lap. Like, it shouldn't always be the secretary has to do it, or the person that cares about it is the one that has to do it all the time. It is something that collectively as a team, they should, negotiate about what tasks need to be done regularly and how to rotate it around the team so that everybody participates, including the boss. Hopefully the boss will participate as part of the team as well. You may need to get some reinforcement or instructions from the boss about, in order to get the whole team participating, like it needs to be an edict from the boss that we want this space clearer. We need this to function better. Everybody has to participate in making that happen. If you need to trash something, or you want to decide what needs filing, shredding, or removal from the office, There may be governing company policies around that. So you really need to consult if the items that you're trying to declutter are work product instead of random decor, office supplies. There may be collections of work product, collections of files, collections of resource materials that are being used by the team that there may actually be covered by company policy. So you need to know what the company policy is,
or even legal requirements.
Right. And so what their filing requirements are, what do they have a shred policy in place? Is there a timeline around it? That kind of stuff. And so make sure you understand what the policies are before you start throwing things out, because you don't want to throw a bunch of stuff out and then go, oh, we need to keep that. Yeah. So make sure you understand what's governing your industry, your office, whatever. And then you want to make any rearrangement plans together as a team. So if you have an idea about how that workspace could be better laid out, maybe the storage room can be rearranged, maybe the shared bookshelves can be laid out in a different way or filled in a different way. How to set a support materials can be better stored. If not in the bookcases, maybe there's certain things that you can pack, put somewhere else, put in another room, put off site. You want to make sure that you understand who's using those materials first. So make sure that everybody's needs and their use of the items are met. You don't want to be packing up some materials and then find out that somebody else in your department comes to those materials every day and you just send them off site. So you do want to have a conversation with the team about, I think we can do X, Y, Z in this area. How does that impact you guys? Does that work? Will that interfere with your workflow? Does it change how you do your job? Does anybody care about this stuff over here? If we don't, does that mean we can box it up? Can we shred it? Can we throw it out? Just like at home, there are places in the office where people go park things that they're not using because they don't feel like they have the right to make that choice because you're at work. And you don't own it, the business owns it, and nobody is thinking about whether it needs to stay or go. They're just going, okay, I'm not using it, I want it out of my way, and they go shove it out of the way. So there's lots of backwash in a shared office of things that nobody wants to make a decision about. And so figuring out what those things are, asking the boss what you are allowed to do, and asking everybody around you in the team, is anybody using this stuff? Does it matter if we send it away? If you can get the information clear before you start moving things around and making things change. Consensus is really built around a plan. And so if you are wanting to organize something that everybody participates in, I think the best thing to do is go ask them what and how they're using the stuff and what their opinion is about what needs to be done, and see if you can find a common thread among the suggestions. You don't want to pick a plan that torques somebody off right away. So aim for the plan that makes people at least accepting, if not embracing. If they accept what you have as a possibility before you start changing and moving things. And I'll just tell you that when I work with clients and I go in, and the first thing that you do when you reorganize is you destroy what is. And that destruction makes a big old mess. And you have to make a big old mess for a while before it starts to come together. You filtered everything out that you're not going to keep. The stuff that you're going to keep ends up going back and being reinstalled, in essence, in the new way that you're envisioning. And so there is a destruction mode that a lot of people find really anxiety producing and distressing. And so recognizing that before you start to deconstruct something around somebody, you need to make sure that they know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And hopefully you've got them participating or helping, or at least they've chimed in advance about what you can do, so that when you start to tear something apart, they're not as shocked, and they know what you're aiming for. They know what you're destroying and what you're trying to fix. so they can at least know that the destruction isn't going to last forever. I think
Okay,
that helps teams better.
let's talk about what my clutter is trying to tell me.
What my clutter is trying to tell me. So an anonymous audience member suggested we discuss what your clutter is telling you, especially recurring clutter. She suggested that we examine clutter in a positive light as important information waiting to be read. If clutter happens in a certain area, maybe it needs to be accommodated in that place. For example, if clothes that never get hung up and you always just fish stuff out of the clean laundry hamper, maybe just have a place to put that hamper. Learning to deal with stuff based on how you actually live, not how you should live. And sometimes clutter accumulates in obvious spaces for obvious reasons. We come into the house with an armload of stuff, so we look for the first horizontal space that we can see a little daylight on, and we unburden ourselves. If we've cultivated good habits, we promptly circle back to process that stuff, to route it to where it belongs. Most of us are successful circling back to groceries so that they don't die. We put those things up pretty regularly, but other kinds of stuff we don't. Sometimes the accumulation of clutter offers signals about the places and items in our home that are lacking systems and processes to handle the stuff we collect. So here's some survey results around that. We asked the audience, where do you experience recurring clutter? And Marilyn said, kitchen counter space is too easy to clutter and use for sorting since I keep it clear. My husband uses it to sort papers and then is slow to clear them away. And apparently he tells her his desk is too cluttered for sorting, which made me laugh.
Yeah, that's a story we seem to hear a lot.
Right. We all respond to the irresistible allure of a clear horizontal space. Funny how those who are not willing to create a clear space for themselves are happy to make use of the clear spaces that others maintain. Somehow the lure of spreading it all out so you can see it makes an ever-expanding pile over a large area. It's not an easy or comfortable way to live with your papers. Marilyn's husband's clutter has gotten out of hand and is now spilling over into other spaces. And if you don't address the piles that already exist, you're destined to keep creating more piles everywhere until it spreads like that expanding foam that covers the whole house. When you spray the foam and then it goes, whirr. This is what happens to clutter that spreads everywhere. Their situation also points out the necessity to communicate your needs about organizing to the other people who share your space. So Marilyn has a right to her clear kitchen counter horizontal space, and her husband needs to spread his paper somewhere other than the kitchen, or he needs to agree to sort the paper on that surface and then immediately remove the paper to where it needs to go. After sorting it, he's using the kitchen counter to sort. The kitchen counter does not transform itself into a file cabinet. So those papers needs to go away right away. Like, it's okay, fine, you want to use this surface to sort, but you need to sort and then you need to get it out. Connie listed shoes, slippers, mostly in the entry hall or corridor, that are a tripping danger. Things from the dishwasher that my dear husband still doesn't know where they get put up all over the kitchen. So I can imagine a husband standing there and pulling things out of the dishwasher and sitting them on the counter because he doesn't know where to put them. It's like, yeah, that might be a little passive aggressive way. He's trying not to empty the dishwasher, but it also may mean that he needs a little education about where stuff's supposed to go. A lot of people struggle with shoes. And one problem with shoes is that getting them off of our feet is a burning priority. But once that's done, we don't care too much about what else happens to them. But they can create a serious tripping hazard. So it's important to cultivate good habits around shoe storage. As for the dishwasher, there's a few approaches you could consider. We've talked before about using labels on cabinet doors or on the shelves inside cabinets to let other household members know where items belong, or posting photos of the contents of a cabinet or drawer with everything in the designated spot so you can see where everything's supposed to be parked. Another solution is to plan to join your husband in the kitchen after he's unloaded all the easy stuff, and then gently remind him when each of the problem items shows up. Oh, don't forget that goes in the upper cabinet to the right. It sounds like a recipe for conflict, the simplest remaining suggestion, if that sounds like a recipe for conflict, the simplest remaining suggestion we have is to designate a space in the kitchen, perhaps a bin or a clean dish towel, where he can put anything that he's unclear about, and then you can circle behind him and put it away yourself. At least then those items won't end up all over the kitchen in random spaces. If he sort of has a little parking blanket to sit them on, then he can park them and let you pull them out. But I'm not sure that parking them on the counter is any better than leaving them in the dishwasher until you can put them up. I think it would be,
unless that's in support of another good habit of if you've got him unloading and then reloading.
Oh, right. Then he's got to got to clear it in order to load. Yeah, I can see that. And so putting them to the side so that you can come and put them away. I would continue to train him about where they go. So while he's unloading it, I would be there and say that, don't forget that goes down here under the, see where this is. You can keep showing them and eventually some of it will stick and he'll know what to do with them.
CJ said, my DH recently asked me to show him all the kitchen systems and processes and where things go so that he can get items to their final destination rather than leaving everything spread out everywhere. It was a relief for both of us to be on the same page again.
Yay, that's good. Well, nice that he asked for the feedback so that it made it okay for you to tell him. That's wonderful. I want you to think about all the kinds of things that are washed up in one place. Where's that snowbank happening where everything piles up in a big wad? Is it all mail? Is it all toys? Or is it a bunch of unrelated items that you don't know what to do with? If your mail, for instance, backs up on the kitchen table, it means you don't have a standard process for dealing with it. Or you have a process, but it's too difficult for you. Or you created a process that you're not actually willing to do. So part of what we're asking you to think about is sorting all those piles, that the backwash, the snowbank pile that's sitting there on your kitchen counter or on the coffee table or fill in the blank in the hallway, and look at that collection of stuff, sorting it into like with like, and seeing what problems are being reflected there in that pile. There may be all kinds of reasons that things are piling up in one place, and it may require an investigation of each item to find the systems that you need. I do this a lot with clients. The pile of stuff that they can't figure out what to do with is really this huge collection that nobody wants to, they don't want to go through the process of evaluating each individual piece and making a logical decision about it. And so I go through that pile and sort it, and the sorted items suggest a direction that needs to be taken to me. And then I start asking them questions about, okay, these things all seem to go together. Do you agree? Where are they coming from? When do you have to access them? And so I try to find out how these things came to be a part of the family home and who's using them, what they're using them for, et cetera, et cetera. And then I stop and go, okay, in order to handle these types of things, I need to do X, Y, D. I think we need to go put it over here. I think we need to put it in a bag. I think we need to carry it off to the other room, whatever. Some examples would be, you find coupons all over everywhere. Maybe there's a pile of coupons. Maybe you're pulling them out of the circular, the weeklies, or they're coming home from somewhere else. Well, coupons inside the house don't do you any good, right? So the system around coupons needs to be collecting them and getting them in your purse or in your car so that when you're actually out in the world where these coupons can be used, you have them with you. So recognizing that maybe there's some coupons backing up because you're trying to save the coupons, but you aren't going the extra step to go and create a system around coupons so that you can actually use them. Bills are a perfect example of everybody needs a system to handle the bills. And when they come in, leaving them in a pile on the counter for you to remember to get to isn't going to solve your problem. So having a place to go process where you sit and process the bills is where the bills most likely need to be collected. And how you collect them, in an open container, in a drawer, in a closed container, fill in the blank, in a file folder, is up to you. But the idea of here's bills that come in regularly and I need to do something with them, which is pay them. So then you have to ask yourself the rest of the questions. When and where do I pay them? Well, I sit at my computer and I pay them online. Okay, then storing the bills somewhere near the computer that you're going to use to pay them, it makes good sense. Like it's a logical place to park them. Magazines bank up everywhere, catalogs, and they need a parking space. Leaving them and letting them seat a new pile somewhere on some counter is just going to make you crazy. And so recognizing that A, you have magazines and catalogs coming in, and B, you don't want them all over everything. So we got to find a place to park all of the magazines, park all the catalogs. And then when it gets full, to circulate some of it so that it goes away. So creating a parking space for that stuff that you want to save, and then creating a filtering system so that it doesn't just continuously grow bigger and bigger is super important. You will find in your piles of stuff, as she said, if you read the piles of stuff, you will find all kinds of things that you want to do, you want to say, you want to investigate, you want to follow up on, whatever. And each of those things, each type of things that you find there are going to need another system and a way for you to think your way through them, to decide how to use them, decide how to keep them, decide how to store them. And there's not one solution that's going to work for the whole pile. And my clients always, they always need me to help them do it when it gets down to those big jumbo collections.
Okay, we are over time, and we have a couple of announcements we need to make.
Okay.
Starting with talking about next week. We do have one more live meeting for the year. We'll be meeting as usual on Tuesday, December 20th at the usual time, noon US Central Time, live in Zoom and streaming on Facebook. Sometimes the pressure of other activities and priorities means that we have to put our organizing projects on hold, or at least in slow motion. And it can be hard to keep enthusiasm and momentum when the time comes to restart. Next week, we'll offer strategies for keeping focus and commitment for projects that we've put on hold. We will also share a holiday gift of self-care tips. So join us next week for hit pause on organizing projects and self-care for holiday stress. Would you give us the tittle?
I will. So the tittle this week is, we hope we're trying to give you a little easier one. It's called Stop, Look, and Listen. This week's assignment is to spend a few moments listening to what some of your clutter is trying to tell you. So we want you to collect 3 items, just 3, that you'd identify as clutter based on where they're located in your home right now. And then ask yourself a few questions about each item. How or why did this item end up where it is? Did it happen by default? Like you set it down and you never picked it up again? By design, so you were using it there and then never put it away? Or by some other means, like another person dropped it there? Does this item have an assigned home already? Is that place still appropriate? If yes, you can put the item away. If the place doesn't have a home, or if its current storage spot doesn't seem quite right, then consider assigning a storage location or a solution that works better. What are your habits connected to the use of this item or similar items? And what habit could you cultivate to keep this item or type of clutter from coming back? Ask yourself those few little questions. We didn't want it to be hard this close to the holiday. We know that you're busy. So we're trying to make it be a small 3 things. You're only going to ask the questions about 3 little items and see if you can have the experience of figuring out why something is a problem and solving that problem.
And what your clutter is trying to tell you.
And you get to tell us about it next week.
If you're watching this on YouTube, we would love for you to join us live. To get notifications about upcoming events, we invite you to join the meetup group by visiting cfhou.com/meetup. You can also follow us on Facebook by visiting cfhou.com/Facebook, or subscribe to our mailing list by visiting cfhou.com/subscribe. We'd love to hear from you, so please keep your questions, comments, topic suggestions, and survey responses coming.
Right, survey answers.
You can always reach us through our website at clutterfairyhouston.com.
Thanks everybody for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our topic today. Thanks for rolling with us being late, and we will see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.